Many of you already know him and have seen him at conferences nationally and worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions. He's the founding director of Data Blueprint, associate professor of information systems at Virginia Commonwealth University, and president of DAMA International. Peter has held a variety of positions, 2 of them at the Department of Defense and Software Engineering Institute. By now, he has written 7 books and dozens of articles. He's experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries, and he is consistently named as one of the top 10 data management experts in the world. He's highly desired at conferences and workshops and always traveling to numerous speaking engagements and projects. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Eileen, and also thank you, Shannon. We're all looking forward to getting together at the Enterprise Data World Conference that is upcoming at the end of April in Atlanta, and so we hope to see a lot of you down there as well. Again, thank you for joining us today. We're going to try and cram a lot into this hour-and-a-half session in here, and most importantly, we really want to get to your questions, so we really are looking for this to be as interactive as we can possibly make it. This presentation, again, is being brought to you by by Data Blueprint and also by Virginia Commonwealth University, which is the largest university in the state of Virginia. We are affiliated with them, and in fact, they partly own the company. It's always a little bit fun to work on that. The outline of what we're going to go over today is fairly dense. We're going to start off with an overview of data management, talk about data and information architectures, why are they important. I'm going to give you a framework to help organize your knowledge around this subject as well. Give you some building blocks. We'll look at some guiding principles and best practices and considerations on this. Finish up at the top of the hour with some takeaways and some references that we always include as part of this as well. Remember, our goal in this is to try and get you all prepared to sit down for something called the CDMP. Now, the CDMP is something that is produced and operated by, in this case, DAMA International. And so DAMA International is the largest organization of data managers around the world. We have chapters in 50 countries or so. It's just a phenomenal group of people that we get to work with on this. And as you can see here, this is the wheel by which we describe the data management body of knowledge. We started off last month with data governance, and now we've moved directly up to 12 o'clock data architecture management. The next one will be as we work our way around the wheel clockwise there, so you'll see that. In addition, however, though, we don't want to let you have the impression that data management is strictly a technical discipline. And so the data management body of knowledge also includes what we call some of the environmental elements as well in this. And as I mentioned before, the goal really here is to try and get you all to be able to sit for the CDMP, and at the Enterprise Data World Conference that is coming up, you will be able to sit and take some practice sessions, and inevitably we have a couple dozen people that pass the CDMP who become part of the group of under 1,000 people worldwide that are, in fact, certified data management professionals. We've given you some information here on the screen that you can use to do this, and when Eileen sends out the PDFs for this, you can actually click on those live links. They will take you to where you need to go. So it's after lunch here on the East Coast and a little bit difficult. So I'm going to throw a large, complicated diagram with you, which is when data managers talk, this is how we talk about data management, and this is way too complicated for after lunch. So I'll give you the high-level version of it that you probably need to explain to your managers. So this is the high-level version of what we're talking about in data management. It really boils down to 5 specific data management functions. The first one is called data program coordination. And this is the idea that all of us need to be working towards the same goals from the same sheet of paper. Because if we're not, then our data management initiatives are less productive than they should be in order to work on that. The second function is organizational data integration, and this is sharing data across boundaries. Sometimes the boundaries are from program to program. Sometimes they are from one part of the organization to another part of the organization. Sometimes they are between our organization and another organization, our business partners. So again, this is the type of thing that we're trying to do, and we're trying to do this as efficiently, as effectively as possible. The third data management function then is data stewardship, and this is the idea that we need to assign responsibilities for data. If data quality is everybody's responsibility, everybody else does it. So we want to, in fact, put names on specific data elements and say, In this case, for example, Lisa Nelson, who I know you're listening out there to us, you are responsible for some of these elements on this, and that's the time when you will sit up and pay attention to this, because if you don't, it, like I said before, it becomes part of everybody's thing, and that, of course, doesn't really help much at all. Our fourth data element function then is, data management function is to engineer data delivery systems. Excuse me. Unfortunately, our colleges and universities, and remember I am a college university professor, teach you how to build new databases. That's really the last skill we need out there in the world. I'm not taking anything away from any of the existing data managers that are working on this, but what we also need to do is teach them about virtualization, XML integration, and a lot of other specific components that we look into this as well. Our fifth data management function is maintaining data availability. Again, the goal here is to make sure that in situations of business continuity or other times of strife, that we are in fact able to recreate or to maintain business as we go forward. So that's what we mean by data management. Now we're going to move on to data and information architecture. And the DMBOK, the book of knowledge that we're talking about here, defines data architecture in a very specific way. What you'll see on your screens here is an IPO diagram. You'll see on the left-hand side of it the inputs, on the right-hand side of it the outputs. They're called deliverables in this particular model. We have the activities, those are the processes in the center, and you'll see the goal and definition at the top and the participants at the bottom on this. We'll go into this in a little bit more detail, but it's a great high-level summary to describe what we're trying to do in this area. Now, let's start with a question about architecture. And the question sort of comes up and says, well, what is architecture? How do we relate to it? Well, a great quote that is over 500 years old at this point is from Niccolo Machiavelli's book, The Prince. And the quote is very straightforward. He who doesn't lay his foundations beforehand may by great abilities do so afterwards, although with great trouble to the architect and great danger to the building. What this means is that organizations have to have a good foundation to do some of the things that they're trying to do. And here's the first sort of dirty secret about data management and a lot of other fun things. You cannot do business intelligence, analytics, big data, any of the things that we want to do with data unless you first have a good foundation. And most organizations don't. In fact, that's our question at this point. So we have a specific question here for you. This is one of the things we do in this is a polling question. We're interested in your specific opinions on this, and we'll of course give you the answers to this. But I'll turn it over to Eileen and let her give us the first question that we have here, because this is some objective scientific information that we have. Eileen?
Yep, so we have, let me launch our first polling question for today. Most organizations do not formally manage any type of architecture. Now, Peter has surveyed 500 different organizations around the world and found that not all of them really have architectures in place. And we're just looking for your opinion. What do you think is the percentage of organizations worldwide with data architectures?
We'll give you a minute to sort of give us your thoughts on this. We use this actually to help measure whether we're making progress in getting our message out worldwide. So again, I'll look for you all to give us some information on this, and we'll vote for about a minute on this, and then we'll dive into the actual response on this. Gee, Eileen, I should have got my Jeopardy music, right? Hang on.
Yes. It looks like most people actually submitted. Let me share the results with everyone.
We're all done already.
Wow. To see. Yep. So most of you selected. We have 1% said 80%. 4% of you said 60%, 23% said 40%, and the most popular answer was less than 10%.
Well, I think our audience here is certainly getting into the educated mode, and the 49% is in fact correct. We have in fact good evidence that less than 10% of the organizations that are out there attempt to do this. So this is one of the first takeaways from this, is to say that in organizational technology group, if you're doing even a little bit of this, you're probably ahead of your competition. And that's a tremendous thing. And it's a thing that can give you what we call a sustained competitive advantage in the long run. That, however, I'm going to complicate the answer just a bit, and I hope this doesn't cause any confusions. I will make the statement in just a minute that all organizations have an architecture. The question is whether you're using it. And that's what we're going to try and look at in just a little bit. So what do organizations manage when they're trying to do this? Well, many organizations coming from the James Champy Mike Hammer School of Reengineering try to manage their process architectures, and that's a good thing. A lot of other organizations manage their system architectures. And again, these are good things as well. Some organizations will look at business architectures. Others will look at security architectures. There are technical architectures that people can look at. And I'm just listing these up here on the board. And of course, the thing that we are concerned with is data and information architectures. Now, not all organizations, as you've seen, take a look at this. What do we mean by architecture here? Well, oh dear, and I see I have a font problem. No, it's not. That worked out okay. Just Wikipedia gives us architecture as the process and the product of planning and designing and constructing that reflects the various considerations that go into it. Again, there's a lot of different work in here, and we will dive into some aspects of this where it relates to engineering at some point in the near future here. But this is really what we're talking about. On the other hand, you don't really want to, if you think about it, everybody has to have their elevator speeches. You know, you get on the floor, the 20th floor, and the big boss gets on and looks over at you, looks at your badge, and says, hello, you work for me. Tell me what it is you do. And if you say, well, we do both the process and product of planning and designing data architectures, the next question is likely to be, what does that do for me? So let's take a look at some of the definitions that have been out there. And I have some issues with these, but they're still okay places to start. The first one says information architectures are plans that guide the transformation of strategic organizational information needs into specific information systems projects. Well, good answer, but I'm not sure the boss will really get that one as well. The second answer here is quite a bit more detailed. I'm not going to read it at all, but if you said to the boss, I produce drawings, charts, plans, documents, designs, blueprints, and templates that help everybody make more efficient and effective and productive and innovative use of information, we're getting closer. By the way, I love the book there. It's Roger and Elaine Evenden's Information First book. It is a very good book. Even the DM Bach has what I consider to be not the greatest definition, but it's certainly a good one. It's defining the data needs of the enterprise and designing the master blueprints to meet those needs. Well, good. Let's take one other definition here that's the one that I've been using lately and that people actually do start to understand. Data architecture is about creating a common vocabulary for expressing requirements that ensure that data assets are stored, managed, arranged in systems. Now again, I wouldn't read that to the boss, but if you said to the boss, I'm in the process of developing the vocabulary so that we all speak the same language, and when I send data from one part of the organization to another part of the organization, it all works really well. That's, I think, a great place, and the boss, I think, will understand that particular piece. Now, I mentioned just a minute ago, and it's critically important that you understand this, all organizations have information architectures. Even the 90% of them that are not managing their information architectures, they all have them. It exists. Your organization has an information architecture, whether you've been working on it for 5 years or whether you've just been hired into the position of trying to take a look at some of these things. The question that comes up is how well understood and documented and therefore useful is your information architecture in that context. So again, it's not about making an information architecture, it's about documenting and understanding and using your information architecture, because if you don't try to do that, you are wasting or underutilizing one of the most valuable assets in an organization that has a particular characteristic of not wanting to deteriorate over time, like unfortunately us people deteriorate over time. So that's what we mean by data and information architecture. Why is it important? Well, everybody knows when you get an architect, they turn around and say, hey, what would you like to have? Oh, yes, I'd love to have a beautiful house. Great picture, you know, lovely thing. Everybody can picture what a house is. Unfortunately, the information architectures of most organizations don't look quite as good. In fact, they look closer to this. Now, if you see this line on the screen here, you could imagine a wonderful IT person up there at the top of that roof adding another layer of complexity onto that. But you can see that it does not provide a good foundation for the rest of the building that needs to occur in there. And again, most organizational information architectures look closer to this rather than that wonderful looking house that we had on the previous slide. Again, the problem is that most data architectures are poorly understood, and the asset value of organizational data is not well understood. We don't teach this subject in colleges and universities in general. There are a few selected places that in fact do a terrific job of this, but for the most part, in colleges and universities, they teach you how to build a new database, and that is not an information architecture approach. Again, they are inarticulately explained, and much of the stuff that's been written out there is just plain wrong. And finally, they are only indirectly experienced, as in when an organization has a problem that I guarantee you I will find a data cause at the root of the vast majority of organizational challenges that they have. They don't recognize it as a data challenge, and consequently, they try to address the symptoms instead of specifically addressing the cures in these areas. The causes, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. One example in particular, and we won't dive into this now, but it does come up in a couple of seminars from now, the opportunity to purchase software packages, which is something that organizations are doing more and more of. You can look and see if the architecture of the software package complements your existing information architecture. If it doesn't, then that's a good reason not to buy the package, because it means you're going to spend more time and more money actually putting that package in place than you would have if you had selected a more compatible package. But for those of us in data management, we have in the past not been able to do a lot of this specific look and feel in terms of trying to figure out the software, and so consequently they don't think to ask us, and we don't think to insert ourselves into that particular equation. That said, though, if you do take a minute and run down to your purchasing agent when you find out that organizations are buying a software package and say to them, would you ask them for a copy of their data model of the software before they actually make the final decision to purchase? You'd be amazed the purchasing agent won't necessarily know what a data model is, but they will appreciate the fact that you've given them another objective constraint. And if the vendor doesn't provide the software model, it's going to be impossible for you to decide whether or not this package, in fact, complements your existing architecture or not. I'll give you one more step. I see there's a couple of you in there from the federal government. It is against federal law to purchase a software package that doesn't actually complement your information architecture. I had a hand in writing that law many years ago. It's called the Klinger-Cohen Act of 1996. So if you're in the federal government, you may not buy a software package. It is against the law to buy a software package unless you understand how it complements in your existing information architecture. Now this next slide shows a bunch of questions that architectures can address. And you can see them pretty straightforward. I'm not going to read them all, but it's things like what are the components, how do they interact, when we make changes, where do they go, what should we manage organization-wide, and what should be managed locally, what rules should we apply to these things, and all the rest of that. These are architectural questions, and when people start to ask you those questions, it's really important that you say, I have a process where I can start to provide you some factual information about those questions. Now this leads us, speaking of questions, back to our next polling question up here. So again, Eileen, I'll turn it over to you. We're curious as to your views on where you think most organizations have information about their customers. Eileen?
Let me launch. Let me launch our second.
That. You just told a couple hundred people that you were going to launch.
I'm sorry. Let me launch our second polling question here.
I'll just leave it to launch, right?
Okay.
We'll get you a rocket ship.
Thanks. So the average organization contains information about customers in more than one place, and we're looking for your opinion in how many places do you think that is?
In other words, we asked the question, customer information is stored in how many places around your organization? And again, we have objective scientific information on the answer to this question, which will allow you, if you know what the answer is to your own organization, to decide whether you are above average or below average.
People are still voting. Just going to leave it up for a few more moments. Oh, okay. We actually have two where people seem to be undecided. Okay, let me share the results with everybody. So, okay, it's 33 did edge out just a little bit. Was the close tie between 9 and 33 places, and then 17 was selected by all of you as the winner.
I think people have been listening to some of this. 17 is, in fact, the correct number. The average organization maintains its customers in 17 different locations. Now, that's presenting a wide variety of organizational problems. At my university, for example, if we didn't have a centralized place for where students changed their address from, they would have to know that they would have to go around to 6 different places in the university in order to do this. Banks are looking at this and saying, we want to do customer relationship management. Well, if you have one watch, you can tell what time it is. But if you have 2 watches and they're at 2 different times, it becomes very difficult to tell what the actual timing is. And this is an advertisement that comes from SAS data flux people who are real good in the data quality area. It's not a plug or anything. I just love the ad. Here's a situation that they found in one of their contexts where a customer had come in with the name J.E. Smith from the website because the Internet Explorer had just put their initials out there and put it in place. And then we get another one where the call center operator has a very poor connection on the line, and they write the customer's name down as Joni Smith. Well, again, that's not terribly helpful. And then we have another one, I don't know about you guys, but I'll oftentimes when people ask me for information put sort of a little bit of spelling twist on it so I can see who's selling my information to somebody else. So here Joan has put herself down as Joan E. Smith on that. And then we have a third party that's gone and bought this customer list, and she comes up as Joni Smith there. And it looks to this organization like they have a bunch of different customers, but in fact they are all just one customer. It's the same person all the way through, which again we know can provide some very, very significant challenges in this area. Now, next question that people come up with all the time is, should I manage my information and data architecture separately? And the answer is quite simply absolutely not. What you see here on the screen here again is that data consists of a fact and a meaning. If I give you a number of any number sort, and I know some of you know the number 42, you'll have to stick around for another seminar to find out what 42 means, but that pairs a fact and a meaning, but it doesn't actually help us with anything. The second component of this, though, then we say, okay, well, let's put some information into it. In other words, when I add a request onto that data, like, what is the meaning of life? That now takes the information, the data, and turns it into information. Our third spot here then is how do we use it? And we now add the use factor in there as well, and now we have intelligence, knowledge, wisdom, data warehousing, whatever we're calling it this particular month. And I do sound a little cynical because after 30 years in this business, I've been watching these things come and go, and it's, old wine in new bottles, basically. Now, the point of this diagram here is to say that if you're trying to build something that gives you some business intelligence, some knowledge, some analytics, some big data insights into things, if you don't, first of all, manage your facts and meaning and then manage how those facts and meaning are likely to support information requests, you will have a poor foundation upon which to build. And again, these are necessary but insufficient conditions for actually building this out. Now let's take it on to the next section on this. We end up going from here to take a look at what frameworks are involved in this. And it turns out there are a bunch of data architecture frameworks. This is the good news. On the other hand, it's like having 2 watches that tell different times. It's a little bit problematic. I've given you enough references here that if you take any of these terms and Google them, you will start to see some additional information on this. I'm going to specifically address the DODAF, which is based on the Zachman Framework down there at the bottom that I've bolded. Now, first of all, what is a framework? Well, it's a system of ideas for guiding analysis. It's a means of organizing your project data. It's a means of understanding how you should make priority decisions in the process. And you can also assess your progress as you are moving into or out of various phases of the project. So the Zachman Framework is the one that I'm posting on the screen here now. John has done a marvelous job over the years of evolving his framework. It's now called the Enterprise Ontology, which I think complements very, very well what I've been talking about in terms of describing enterprise vocabularies. If you've seen the Zachman Framework in its previous versions, it is absolutely worth your time to go back and look at this latest version. John has worked very hard on this and has come up with a phenomenally better product out of it. The old product was good. This product is better. Again, you can notice just a couple things that I'll point out to you. We have classification names across the top. On the right-hand side, we label the specific models that we're looking at, which correspond to various audience perspectives. Again, the executive perspective at that top row is where you want to have your elevator pitch aimed. Again, if you just Google John Zachman's Enterprise Framework, make sure that you get the third version of this, the Enterprise Ontology version, and you will see a marvelous set of information there that you can do. It's just, the work that he's done is just leaves me kind of speechless. Again, I've known John for a number of years, and it's fantastic we're getting this kind of really superior results because he keeps thinking about the process. And this, if you didn't know John, that would be unusual for him not to do that. Now, this diagram I've actually gotten a lot of success with here as well because people say, well, help me place this stuff in context. And what you see here is that the way in which data architectures, and by the way, I would say data from this point on, but it's data information, right? But the way in which these architectures work from this point is the organization has some needs, whatever those needs are. It then instantiates, that's a computer science terms, it means it makes it real, into a data information architecture. That's the little blueprint that's in the middle there. And that blueprint then specifies the specific information system requirements that are necessary in order to meet those organizational needs. And the process continues and never stops. So again, another thing to take away from here is that a data and information architecture is a program. It is not a project. I see an awful lot of organizations trying to manage it as a project. It doesn't work if you manage it as a project. You must manage it as a program. So again, these organizational needs keep reinforming the organizational architecture, which then tells us what specific information systems requirements. Now, those of you that are kind of reading between the lines here, you can see that this is completely different from the way most organizations do it. They go out and build systems to meet their organizational needs, and then they try to figure out how to make it work. Again, this is one of the root causes of many of the problems that we have in IT in general. So again, we may have some questions on that, but I'll be glad to take them when we get to that. Our next section here then are what are the specific building blocks that we need to look at this. And we do this for each of the topics in this particular seminar series. So we did last month's data governance here. Now we're going to look at the goals, principles, activities, primary deliverables, roles and responsibilities, technology that is useful in here, practices and techniques, and organizational culture on this. And we're coming up on another quiz question, so I'll get you guys ready to give me some more responses on this here. But again, let's go back to our data architecture management overview and say, what are the specific goals and principles that we're trying to put in play? Well, the first one is to try and, to the degree possible, anticipate and provide high-quality data for the organization to use in its strategic decision-making. If we're able to do that, we're able to demonstrate some really good value very, very quickly. The second goal, then, is to identify and define specific common data requirements that the organization will need. Now, we want to focus on the common data requirements so that we don't end up looking at minutia. Now, we actually have another word for minutia in data architecture, and that is the word ROT, R-O-T. ROT is an acronym that I did not invent, and I wish I had because it's a pretty good one, standing for redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And most of the data in organizations is trivial, although that's the question we're going to ask you in just a second. How much of that do you think that is? So again, here our third goal is to design and implement structures and plans that meet the current as well as the long-term needs of the enterprise data. And Eileen, I'll turn it over to you for our third question here.
Great, thank you so much. Let me launch the next question.
So she doesn't want to be talked about going off into space again, right?
That's right, not this time, no. Oh, 1 second, here we go. So what do you think, what percentage of data handles most of your information needs? We have 80%, 50%, 20%, or 5%?
I do actually have the Jeopardy theme music now. There we go. I think I have to give Merv Griffith some money if I play that, but that comes a broadcast situation, Shannon? I don't know. By the way, you guys should know just what a combined effort this is. Shannon is coming to us from Portland. I'm somewhere in the middle of the country, and Eileen is back on the East Coast. So wonderful virtualization here.
Yep. Looks like most of you had a chance to vote. So let me share the results with you. We have a clear winner answer, 20%.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, we're going to have to write some new material here and get some new questions because these guys are right on. Yes, absolutely. 20% of the organization is in the category of really important information that we need to have, and 80% of the data in your organization falls into redundant, obsolete, or trivial. That's a sad state of affairs, guys, and it is something that we can go in these days where the belts are tight and the layoffs are imminent and all that sort of good thing. This is a great place to go to try and save yourself some money. In fact, I'll put in a plug for my next book, which is going to be called Monetizing Data Management. It's from a series of talks I gave around the country that shows you how to take these specific things that we're talking about here and show the organization that if they invest $1 with you, you will return more than $1 to them, and that's what it's all about in terms of providing value. So moving onwards here, the data architecture management activities, we want to start looking at these from a very holistic perspective here. And what we're trying to see is, all right, what do we need to do? Well, one thing we need to do is we need to understand the enterprise information needs, just the same way as the people in HR need to understand the organizational human capital needs. We need to work on developing and maintaining something we call the enterprise data model, which is a big thing and a topic in and of itself. We're not going to dive into that too much, but we want to have a guide that shows us how to do this. And again, our experience in this area goes all the way back to one of the very first ones that we did at the U.S. Department of Defense in the early 1990s, which is where I ran into Mr. Zachman the first time in order to do this, because we were looking around saying, how are we going to organize this stuff? And somebody said, hey, there's this guy Zachman here that's got some really good ideas. So again, really, really fun to meet him and work with him along those lines there as well. Next thing we'll do is look and analyze and align ourselves with the other business models and the various business architectures that we have out there as well. We want to define and maintain specifically the data technology architecture, the integration architecture, whatever warehousing and BI structures that we want to put in place, the enterprise taxonomies and namespaces that we're trying to put in place, and the metadata architectures, and perhaps others depending on your organizational needs. Now again, you may not be familiar with each of these, but the data technology architecture talks specifically about how you're going to be delivering these things. Data integration says we're going to integrate based on a hub and spoke, or we're going to use the ERP as the integration. So again, there's a lot of different things that we can put in place. That'll help these out. One of the things that we find that's really interesting, though, is that most organizations keep their data warehousing and their BI groups separate from their data management groups. And that's a little puzzling to us. We're not quite sure why that is the case. There may, in fact, be some good reasons for it. We have not had a chance to explore those yet. That's one of the fun things about what I do is I get to toss a doctoral student at it and say, you work on this problem for a little bit, and we'll come up with an answer in a little bit else. The enterprise taxonomies, namespaces, things like this, these are various types of things that we're moving into that really lead us into more of the semantic web and things like that, but none of it can occur unless you have a metadata architecture underlying all of this. So again, these are the kinds of things that people are looking for, trying to do, and coming up with all of these. And if you need some help on any of these, let us know. As I said, we include some references here at the end of the presentation here, so you can go back and take a look specifically at this. Again, what are our deliverables? Well, there's the enterprise data model. We talked about that as well, but it's the highest level of guidance that we have in the organization that allows us then to derive and, most importantly, I think, harmonize the things that are going on in the rest of the organization. Another very important piece that is woefully neglected by most groups is trying to value the information value chain. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, right now, data does not show up on the balance sheet, but I'm not too sure that's going to remain that way forever. And the more you can show by doing that, the better you will be able to justify your position. Let me give you an equivalent example. Capital One, a very big credit card company or bank now that most of you are familiar with, it costs them $6 every time somebody dials into their call center. Well, that's an enormous amount of calls and an enormous amount of money that goes into that. So again, there's clearly a value chain there, and it's really clear that management is going to pay some significant time and attention trying to figure out how to lessen that value from $6 per call to anything less than that, because that will help the organization save money. I've already mentioned this data technology architecture. How are we going to be delivering these types of value chains that we're going to be putting in place? A data integration, or perhaps an MDM architecture, is another thing that might be there. The BI architecture, the metadata architecture, I mentioned these before in terms of that. More organizations are getting into document management architectures, and one of the more fun aspects of this is that we're starting to see data management really be extended into things like SharePoint. I don't know much about the various SharePoints that each of you have individually out there, but again, our surveys indicate that SharePoint is just a gosh-awful document dump mess. And one of the things that Microsoft has done, moving from SharePoint 07 to SharePoint 10, is that they have a phenomenal now set of taxonometric types of things that you can put in play. So you can actually embed an organizational taxonomy in there into your SharePoint 2010 piece, and if you do a good job of converting your data into it and applying the proper tags, now instead of searching through trying to find a specific PowerPoint that somebody has somewhere there, you can instead do a keyword search that'll say, hey, I'm looking for things called customers, but you know what? We also call customers another value that we put on it. Customers may be sales clients or clients or something like that, and get some synonyms and some clearly associated terms that go along with this as well. We're getting ready to come to our final question on this as well, but the last piece in terms of metadata, in terms of architecture deliverables, is you've got to have metadata. If you're not managing metadata, it's going to be a big problem in your organization. Again, it's kind of like weeding by chopping off the heads of all the weeds. The metadata is really the heart that goes in underneath this. So now we go to our fourth question we have here. Again, Eileen,
Yep.
We're trying to figure out who's responsible for this stuff.
Yes.
Who you think is responsible for this stuff?
Know. Here we go. Who do you think is responsible for the data? Everyone? Only the CIO? Those who produce the data? Or data stewards?
That's kind of silly. We'll stop that. So what do you guys think? Who's responsible for the data?
Looks like they made up their minds. Let me share the results with everyone. There we go.
Everyone.
Everyone, yep. Majority voted for everyone.
Well, the answer we'd like to see actually is data stewards. But I agree with you in the sense that it's everybody's responsibility. The problem is telling everybody it's been their responsibility hasn't really worked in the past. And we've actually ended up with everybody's doing it, which means everybody thinks everybody else is doing it. Actually, the answer we were expecting was the CIO, because most people associate the CIO with that particular type of responsibility. Although, gosh, if we look on the dance card of most CIOs, they have an awful lot on their plate already. So data may be just one thing that may be way too much for them. But here's a chart that does show the various data architecture roles and responsibilities that we have here. These are the various groups of people that you're going to have to work with in order to do a good job on this. Now, if you know what these various topics are, you're probably in pretty good shape. But if some of these are new topics for you, by all means, again, Google, get in touch with us. We'll give you some more information on it. It's a fairly big plot that we've got to try and put in place here. Let's move on now and talk a little bit about data management technologies and what types of things that we actually can put into play. And the first piece that most people recognize and understand is that data architecture management technology depends on some sort of data modeling tool. Now, in many cases, organizations are saying, okay, well, we're not going to buy a case tool, but we can do our data models in PowerPoint or Visio. And I hate to say it, but I'd rather have them use that than nothing. But it doesn't really lend us to the real objective results, because if you're doing that, you don't have the ability to manage the various models that are there. What you have are a bunch of disconnected Visio files or PowerPoint files that end up out there. And you need to have some form of a repository. Now, let me be very clear about this. There are some fine repository technologies out there, but they do cost a pretty penny. but you can start the process of organizing your metadata, your data models, the things that you need to promote your data architecture, into a format where when it becomes appropriate to move into a technology, you're ready, into a metadata repository technology, you're ready. Most of the time what you end up with is organizations keeping stuff in spreadsheets. Well, even spreadsheets are not a bad form necessarily to keep your metadata in, but if you organize and architect them so that they will eventually become inputs to that metadata repository, you will have a much more successful organization because you can apply the metadata management techniques to these various artifacts that you put in place. Also, we see a lot of real interesting things in the way of XML, data discovery and profiling tools, and then office productivity and collaboration tools. But this really is the layout of this. The case tool is going to be largely your most expensive component of this. It's not to say that it's a good or bad thing in and of itself. And the tools and the technologies are coming down because we are seeing people using them more broadly. And I will take a quick side note here, too. We've had an awful lot of inquiries about UML and data modeling. And it turns out that one of my colleagues, David Hay, has done a marvelous job of working with the Object Management Group, the OMG, where they are now improving UML to actually support data modeling at a much more robust level than they have in the past. So I think in the near future we will be able to see UML supporting what we're doing a lot better. Now, another bit that we found recently on the web here were what are the priorities for data architecture tools in this case, and we're starting to see a lot of definition, a lot of things around the glossary. This again gets us back into the semantic web and all the other things that we're talking about with Chavit. Again, another conference that we're associated with is the Semantech conference, where we're trying to take some of these basic things and get into some really, really neat things, such as automatic discovery and automatic understanding of some of these things here as well. We'd love to see the data architecture tools integrate a little better with business process and other different types of business modeling and architectures. And finally, we'd really like to see the web-based collaboration on these. And in fact, Eileen and I just did a webinar a couple of weeks back where CA has now rolled out a neat version of Irwin that now allows you to do exactly this. And again, we'll give a little plug for our friends over at CA. And so if you haven't had a chance to see the new version of Irwin, by all means, take a quick look at that because there's some really neat things there. Well, let's talk about some guiding principles and best practices now. First of all, what you'll see here is that if you understand that data architecture is this integrated set of artifacts, the master blueprints that allow you to define the data requirements, to guide data integration, to control data assets, and most importantly, to align the data investments with the business strategy, that is something that you will be more successful in than most organizations. We see a lot of organizations, and I may be preaching to the crowd here, but remember, you guys are on this because you're already interested in this. What we're really trying to do is reach the people who haven't discovered this yet in here. Again, data should be focused on supporting information and business strategies. If it's not, the question comes up, what are you doing it for? Second guiding principle, then, is that data architecture really has to be managed in part with all the rest of these. Again, process, business, technology systems, all the rest of the architecture. So poke around your organization and find out what other architectural artifacts are being managed by your organization. And then say, look, if we're doing this for processes, we're doing this for security, why shouldn't we be doing this for data? Very, very important, very good leverage point, because most people go, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Again, the enterprise data architecture allows us to specify three things in particular: the enterprise data model, what is the value chain analysis, what value are you putting on your organization's data, how does it contribute to strategy, how big a component of it, and then what should we provide in the way of a data delivery architecture on this. Moving on then, number 4 allows us to take a look. It's not just data, but it's really looking at the semantics. And again, I mentioned the semantic conference just a minute ago, and the definition I gave you of a data architecture at the beginning of this is finding a common business vocabulary for all of these things. If we don't have a common vocabulary, it's going to be very, very difficult on this. The fifth principle is that the enterprise data model should be an integrated, subject-oriented data model defining essential data used across the entire organization. It has a number of layers. There's a subject layer overview and a series of conceptual views of entities and relationships in each specific area, and that some organizations may find value in doing more detailed views of these areas as they progress in their journey towards data architecture. Sixth principle, information value chain, focuses specifically on the relationships between the data and the process and the roles in the organizations and other elements in there. So again, don't do this in a silo, but go out and find your other architects in the organization and allow them to help you to get better at this process and show if you've got chocolate and they've got peanut butter, let's put them together and make a Reese's cup, because that'll be a great one. I guess we have to pay Reese's now too, don't we, Eileen? All right, number 7 here, data delivery architecture, again, defining this master data blueprint for data flows across the various databases and applications. Let's pretend that this is the year 1999 and we have a problem like Y2K facing us again. A data architecture is exactly the thing that you need to have in order to discover where these hidden and embedded dependencies are in the organization. And our 8th piece here is that the various frameworks, again, TOGAF, Zachman, whatever it is that you're looking at, can help you to be focusing your efforts in the right places in here. So I hope those are clear about the best practices in here. 2 more sections in here. First one here is really to recognize that this is an extraordinarily difficult journey that everybody is on. And I've had a lot of luck with this particular chart here as well. I just want to spend a minute to sort of walk our way through it. We have the legacy information up in the top, which is what is working. Now, by the way, my definition for a legacy is anything that's in production. So let's not make any bones about it. Yesterday's COBOL programs are now today's C# programs or .NET environments, and again, there are no differences except for the fact that COBOL, we were usually able to find the source code pretty easy, whereas we tend in this object-oriented world, that's a little bit more difficult. That gets combined then with an organizational information management program that should result in some data governance, specifically directives and policies that come out of there. There are going to be some external organizational integration activities that are coordinated with the internal activities. So again, we're trying to look for synergies so we don't have to redo things or reinvent the wheel. This gives us enterprise-wide requirements, which leads to directly data architecture requirements that are partly influenced by the user requirements and some feedback that comes from the coordination and the user communities that are out there. The development of the organizational data architecture requires a degree of information systems development. However, that is more often spoken about than sought after, and more often sought after than achieved. So we have a lot of people that are talking about doing this. Few of them are trying it. Fewer still are succeeding in this particular area. And again, this is a challenge, although it's also really good news for you, because if you're doing it and your competition across the street is not doing it, then you have a really big potential competitive advantage, as I said earlier on this. If you're not doing a data architecture and your organization is doing strategic planning, they might as well be dancing and trying to make it rain. It's just an absolutely silly exercise. And yet we don't teach this even in colleges and universities. So all of these are very, very significant challenges that we have here in this particular space. Oops, I think I'm missing a slide here. Where is it? Oh, no, there we go. Okay, so, yes, there we go. Again, I mentioned before, 10% of the organizations are actually trying to do this. Some 30%, that's the blue and the red in this chart, are actually achieving positive return on their investment. But 70% of the organizations out there are achieving very little returns on their investment in this data space here. So let's finish it up with a couple of takeaways here as we get to the top of the hour. And I'm just going to kind of review a little bit of this material, but I do think this is pretty good stuff here. So this last slide is actually one of my favorites in here. So what is an information architecture? And again, it's a structure of data-based, not database, data-based information assets that are supporting the implementation of organizational strategy. Most organizations have data assets that are not supportive of their strategies because they are unknown or undocumented or pointed in the wrong direction. This is a big problem for them. So the question is not, should we make a data architecture? You have one. but it's how can organizations more effectively use their information architectures to support their strategy. And this is a great place for you to sit down and think of a couple of examples in your organization of how a data architecture either helped on a successful project or the lack of a data architecture hindered another IT project. We find that negative examples, even though they're kind of unfortunate, they are kind of powerful in there. So people have to pay a lot of attention to this in order to do this. If you can show them, again, just imagine trying to build a large building made out of styrofoam bricks. You can build a little bit of the building in styrofoam bricks, and you might actually get something that you could put a roof over, but you're certainly not going to have floors in this house that are multiple stories. You're not going to have people walking on foam bricks on top of people who are underneath foam bricks. It's got to have a solid foundation, and unfortunately this is where most organizations fall down on this in order to come up with it. So the next takeaway is, what do we mean by using an information architecture? And again, it's this application of data assets towards strategic objectives. Anything else is not the right thing for us to be focusing on. If we're doing it because it's nice or it's fun or it seems like it might be important, let's go out there and find the things that are really important. We can assess the maturity, and you can do this yourself, by looking specifically at some benchmark information that we have. And again, if you're interested in this, just send us an email, and we'll be glad to send it out to you. But there is a well-defined data management maturity model that now shows, and we can also show you specifically how organizations rank on this particular scale. It's, again, work that was done at the Carnegie Mellon Institute that Eileen was referring to earlier. Come up with this. Most of you are familiar with the CMM. It's a very, very interesting set of work that was produced, and it does give you the ability to sort of benchmark yourself against how things work. Now, what does using an information architecture result in? Well, in most cases, it results in increased capabilities in the organization. If I know that I have some building blocks that I can build something with, I can now take those building blocks and build other things with them because I know and understand the properties of these building blocks. If I know and understand the properties of the building blocks, I can do things with them. It's not a question of, if I go out on this limb, will it hold? But I put a very strong limb there so we can now walk on it. By the way, it's not a limb anymore, it's a bridge, so we're going to use it as such. It also results in increased organizational dexterity, and what that means is that when you need to change things, it doesn't become a massive fire drill for the organization to go in and do a bunch of changes. And most importantly, it results in the organization's awareness. Where organizations have really gotten in trouble in the past is that they try to do something that they simply are not able to do. The example that I use an awful lot of the time is that I'll stand up on the front row of a table at a conference and say, if I'm going to do a backflip into the crowd, where are most of you guys going to go? Now, I used to crowd surf at punk concerts when I was a young person many, many, many years ago. But no, that's not what I'm trying to do. In fact, I'm smarter than that. I know that I can't do a backflip, so I know I'm not even going to try. But you'll see organizations that try this on a fairly regular basis. That's really particularly important. This is accomplished through what we call data-centric development practices, and I've alluded to them earlier in this presentation. It's the idea that the data architecture then specifies your system requirements and not the other way around. That's harder to do, it's harder to get people to understand, but it will pay off for you in the long run. So then the final question is, how does an organization achieve better use of its information architecture? And the answer is continuous redevelopment. You can't stop. You'll always be doing this. Remember that circle diagram? It goes around and around. The starting point is the beginning. The only place that the starting point is the beginning is for a brand new organization that has no information architecture and has no assets. You don't encounter those very often, so let's not pay attention to them when they do it. And by the way, when they do start up, they're in startup mode, so they never think about architecture in order to do that. The information architecture components must be re-engineered, and let me give you the technical definition for re-engineering. Re-engineering means first reverse engineering, and then using the information that comes from the reverse engineering exercise to inform the design of the new replacement component that's going in there. Again, most people misuse that term and do it very, very badly. So instead of focusing on an iterative, incremental approach, focusing on one component at a time and applying formal transformations, and again, we've got a 3-day version of this particular class where we'll take you through all those specific transformations, whether you're going into SOA or MDM, or it doesn't matter. We've still got the very specific pieces that need to occur on that process all set up and ready to go for you. If you try to do too much, it won't work, and if you don't try to do enough, it won't work. So again, it's sort of that Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear, just right sort of approach, which means that what we're doing is partly art, partly science, partly human engineering, partly change management, and a bunch of other things. And with that, we are right at the top of the hour here. And as I mentioned before, we will leave you with some specific websites, books, and references that you can take away with you. These are all included in the presentation format in order to do this. And again, put the websites up there. You should see those as well. And I think we're ready at this point to turn it over to the question and answer period. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Eileen.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Yes, everyone, it's up to you now to submit your questions. And in case you still have your screen in full screen mode, just move your mouse to the top of the screen, and the screen should change so that you should be able to type your questions to us in the chat window. Let's see. First question that we had come through was, I am new to data management. What do you recommend where or how to even start?
Well, you're in a great spot, I hope. This has been useful in terms of starting on this. I mentioned the Roger and Elaine Everenden book, Information First. You'll also find some very good books out there by John Zachman and Clive Finkelstein. I would start, however, at the absolute root of this, which is Clive Finkelstein's 1987 article on information architectures. He wrote it in the IBM Systems Journal. It's out of copyright and print, so again, if you have trouble finding it, please just send us an email and we'll be glad to send it to you. John is very happy to make it available to you. It's a wonderful place to start thinking about this, because if you don't have the right perspective on it, it becomes very, very difficult. So you'll see a lot of approaches. People look at it from technical perspectives and things like that. Another reference that I will give you too is Steven Spiewak's book on information architecture. Again, that is also out of print. You can find a used copy or two at Amazon. But Spiewak, S-P-E-W-A-C-K. He died a couple years ago, so we lost a really good voice in that area, but again, a wonderful book. We finally did get a book from Harvard Business Review that started to focus in on this area, and it is called Enterprise Architecture as Strategy by Jeannie Ross, who's actually going to come visit us at VCU in a little while. She'll be our visiting scholar this semester. So those are some good places to start. Again, if they had to start at a specific spot, though, I would go to John Zachman's Information Architecture article. If you have trouble at all finding us, give us a shout, and we'll be glad to get that out to you, because, again, it's one of those things we want to make sure everybody does.
Great. And the next question is, should data architecture planning, information architecture, be functionally separated from data architecture implementation, data modeling, etc.?
That's a really good question, and I've worked with a lot of big organizations and small organizations, and I've decided that the answer to that is no, they should not be separate. The more integration and synergy that occurs between these two groups, the better the organization functions. I say that based on firsthand experience as well as study, but I've seen one organization that I've worked with where the actual two groups that you described, one reported up through a strategy VP and the other one reported up through an operations VP. So they didn't even have the same leadership at the top. It makes everything more complicated. I also advocate putting the BI and data management groups back together as well. As I mentioned before, we have seen them separated in a lot of instances, and I quite frankly have not seen advantages that come from that. Everything I've seen has been introduced confusion.
Okay, the next question. Do you know of success stories of information architecture and data architecture in the government?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the federal government is ahead. I mentioned earlier that the part of the reason that the federal government is doing this type of work is because they passed some legislation in 1996 that said you have to do this. It's against the law to not do it. So there are some very, very good work that's been done in there. In particular, you might look over at the Department of Energy. They have some things out on their website that my colleague Micheline Casey has been working on for a couple of years on that particular project. Really, really good work that you can see out there. We saw the development of the DoD-wide enterprise architecture for the Defense Department. That was a project that I was participating in. And I will say that that has not only saved lives, but also helped us do things that the Army's supposed to do, which is break things and kill people. And again, you know, not necessarily a pleasant topic, but by golly, we want those guys to have the right tools and do the right things, and they seem to have done it based on 20 years of use of an information architecture. I think Department of Education has some things out there. I don't think they're at the federal level, though, but I think they're down in some of the pockets.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions coming through. The next one is, where do you place data architecture definition in the software development lifecycle?
Ooh, very difficult question. So, give me a quick second. This is not in your packet, but I'm going to go ahead and throw another slide up here on the piece, and I think it answers this question perhaps a little bit better than I can do it. Just trying to describe to you a difficult process here. So, apologize for the quiet section here, but I'm going to show you how a colleague of mine recently phrased this question, and we decided that we liked it a lot. So here is the articulation of it. Again, this is not, well, I guess, Eileen, we can go back and throw this into the deck, but it wasn't a part of the overall session. So give me a quick second. Is my screen still showing there? Yes, okay.
Yep,
Here we go.
we see a screen.
So we see that organizations develop strategies, and in support of that strategy, they then make some specific goals and objectives in order to do that. And these goals and objectives allow us then to do some things we normally do. The goals and objectives, however, normally lead to that next level down, the third level down, where I've showing you as data and information. Most people think that the goals and objectives are best met by systems and applications. So to answer your question, I would like to see the goals and objectives lead directly to the development of a data and information architecture that then specifies network and infrastructure requirements that you'll need to have, and then and only then do we start delivering systems and applications. Now that's Peter's pipe dream, but again, I'm seeing organizations that are doing this, and they are achieving very, very significant results in that area. So, Eileen, if you'll help me remember to get this into the deck, too. It's kind of
Sure.
An odd chart, but we'll get it in there for you. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, no problem. We'll definitely add that. So the next question is, I know enterprise data architecture requires a data quality plan to be written. However, my question is, if the data quality plan has to be written at the record level or a generally higher level, or does it not matter?
Generally higher level, and it does matter. If you think about it, some of you may or may not be familiar with Porter's strategy model for business. Porter says that there are basically only two components that organizations compete on, which is a low-cost type differentiator or a significant innovation innovator. If we think of a strategy plan for data quality, that has to go in exactly that same fashion. Data quality should be either focused initially on saving the organization money, and by the way, that's a great place to get started because, again, if they give you $1 and you return to them $1 plus something, that's considered to be a positive return on investment. That is definitely the way I would go. Starting out at the record level is really problematic because it's really hard to show results. Tie your results in data quality and in architecture in general to specific measurables that have to do with organizational strategy. If you don't, somebody sooner or later is going to ask you the question, why are you doing this? Now that said, also you can also look at it as a question of is it better to do it top down and bottom up? And sometimes you don't have any choice but to do it bottom up. But do it bottom up in a fashion that allows you to come up and get something that does try to get to big themes in the organization as opposed to specific smaller types of items. That said, if you can get some small successes, go for them. But my preference is very definitely have a quality strategy in place that says this is what we're going to focus on for the next year, and most organizations focus on trying to save money.
Okay, the next question, should conceptual data models be managed in the same tool, for example, Irwin, or are they better managed in a more business-friendly notation?
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't think I have an absolute answer for you. I know a lot of people that make Irwin do all sorts of things and have really good success with it. I know other organizations that doesn't meet their exact needs. So I'm actually not going to give you an answer on that one. I'm going to say you need to look as the architect for your organization around and see what types of things work best. When we did the DoD data model, we had a terrific anecdote that happened as we were doing this. My boss at the time was giving by the way, he makes me look very applied as opposed to academic. He's a great guy. But he was standing there, and one of the sponsors of this was a very strong woman. I can name her, in fact, Bunny Smith, who was just instrumental in moving this thing forward. And she literally said, "Russ, where are my battleships?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am, that would be of a type resource entity, and we have resources that float and resources that swim, and we have resources that carry guns, and we have resources that land planes, you know." And she said, no, you need to put something out there that speaks to the general officers who are going to be using this. And it turned out what she was talking about was she wanted some clip art to show some examples of the various entities. So when we would show the model, we would have clip art show up around it and make again, specific examples of the things that were there. It's very important that people be able to tie these things. Again, boxes and charts are not terribly helpful to most people unless they understand how those boxes and charts are used. And you guys are the experts at that, not the executives. So very definitely I would focus in on trying to make something that works for your organization. And that's the most important piece. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, let's see. We had a bunch more come through. This one, I think, is in relation to an analogy you might have used through the presentation. Is there an analogy to library science and in pre-computer days, things called the subject file and history file systems of organizations?
Absolutely. And again, this is a very keen insight that you're bringing up to this. A lot of this organizing paradigm that we have, if we were to survey the several hundred of you that are on this call here, we would find a wide variety of backgrounds, most of them not in IT. Most of you were attracted to this profession or to this role because you found that if you focus on the data, you can achieve synergies that you can't achieve elsewhere. And the question is alluding to things like the Dublin Core, for example, where librarians figured out how to manage a library of millions and millions of books in the days before computers by using 3x5 index cards, and they did a damn good job of it. There's a lot of people whose shoulders we're standing on, and a lot of this material that we're talking about that comes to us from library science, from all sorts of statistical sciences and things like this, which is what makes this group kind of an interesting collection of individuals here. Again, if you have a question specifically on that, you can just Google the Dublin Core, D-U-B-L-I-N, and I'll just tell a quick story on myself while we're getting for the next question, which is that I was in Northern Ireland in Belfast at one point, and I was hinting around a bit because I've never been to Dublin, Ireland. And I mentioned something about the Dublin Core, and I said, well, I would love to get down there to do that. And one of the audience members raised their hand and said, Dr. Aiken, that would be Dublin, Ohio that you want to go visit, not Dublin, Ireland. So I haven't been to either Dublin, Ireland, or Dublin, Ohio yet, but if you Google either one of them, you will find it comes right to the top, and you can certainly find out a lot more information about that. Yes, a lot of this is based on some very good stuff that goes back thousands of years.
Great. Let's see what else we have here. What are some of the universities which you recommend that have or provide good data management formal education programs?
One that I will recommend to you is the University of Washington up in Seattle. My colleague Eva Smith has been teaching in that program and has modeled her curriculum to mirror the DMBOK format that is up there. There are a couple of others. What it really is not so much at a university focus, but that there are some people in the university who do a really good job. Another one is the University of Memphis, where my friend Mark Gillenson teaches in the data management program that's there, and also they do a terrific job. The University of Little Rock in Arkansas is a very good focus on data quality programs that's down there, and they actually have a duplicate of the MIT program that's down there as well in order to do that. There's several others. I believe they are on the DAMA website, so maybe you could go to dama.org and see. I can take a quick second here and look at that while we're going to the next question. Go ahead, Eileen, you can do it.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Data architecture seems to be in direct conflict with object-oriented analysis and design, since one of its key concepts is information hiding and instead focus on object responsibilities. How do you reconcile this, and how do we justify creating data architectures instead of or along with object-oriented architectures or service architectures?
Boy, that question hits right at one of the core issues that we are facing as a group right now. There's nothing inherently incompatible about object orientation and what we're trying to do. But where it starts to appear less compatible is when people say, I need the application development to occur faster. And you end up with the agile methods and Scrum and things like that. And I've actually studied agile quite a bit. And it's, again, people are over-making what agile was. Agile is really a very loose set of guiding principles that people are trying to use, but what's happened is that people want to buy those guiding principles and put them to work in the organization, so they end up with more specificity than there actually was in there. So the question is really saying, look, information hiding is an absolute good principle, and we would all agree in this case that doing separation and loose coupling between our business processes or our software and our data is a thing that we want to do, because if it's tightly coupled, when we need to make a change, the systems turn out to be quite brittle. So we can develop in an object-oriented paradigm. It is not impossible to do, but it is very different from what most people are trying to do as they're speeding up their various applications in that area. Again, I went to the DAMA page here, and I do have a page on education and research that's up on there, but it's not showing for some reason right now on your screens. But it's dama.org, DAMA.org, and you guys can take a look at it there as well in order to do that. I mentioned David Hayes been working in that area. He has a new book coming out, and I believe he will be speaking at Enterprise Data World in Atlanta on that topic specifically. So again, another good reason to get down there. If you have trouble getting down there or finding out what we're talking about, again, give me a shout and I'll be glad to do it. But if you just look up Google David Hay on the internet, he comes right to the top, and you can just send him a question on that, and he will be glad to send you a link to his Amazon page so you can buy his book, which I do recommend.
Great. Now the next question in our list here. What DoD data models are you speaking of? Are you familiar with the DODAF DN2?
Absolutely, and that is a successor to the original DoD model that we put together. So DoD has been practicing these principles for the past 20 years and has achieved tremendous success. It's really gratifying when I go to various DAMA chapters and other organizations around the world. I've actually had people come up and say, hey, look, here's the data model we put together 20 years ago, and we're still using it because it's still relevant. Turns out that the data changes a lot less than the processes overall, and that's one of the key drivers behind information-centric development. And if the data doesn't change that much, it means your model will be useful for longer. So yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. They've done a terrific job there, and by the way, they have to do it because it's the law.
Interesting. Okay. Now, next question. In organizations, the subject file was always hard for organizations, and many have given up.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
hard.
let me see. I don't. Maybe that was just a statement. Never mind.
Okay. And that's fine, and it's actually a very good one, though. I mean, this is hard stuff. It's hard to articulate. It's difficult to sell. If you don't put a dollar value on it, people think, what are you doing? So I appreciate the comment. There are enough successes out there to make us believe that this is the way we should be going in that direction, and that more and more organizations are doing it. Let me just sort of see if I can get to another chart here really quickly. Sharon and I almost think we ought to turn around and try to make this a 1 hour question and answer period, because I really get a lot out of these questions here. But let me just see if I can find a chart that might be helpful for people. There we go. This is a chart that shows the relative maturity of an industry. And what I'm going to show you here is a specific airline that we did a maturity assessment for. And if you can imagine, we're talking all sorts of data management types of activities and things like that. And here's where sort of the bottom line came up. So hopefully this will come up on your screen in a second. Yeah, there we go. When I put up on this chart what the airline came in those 5 areas that I started off the session talking about, they were a 1 in data program coordination, a 1 in organizational data integration, a 2 in data stewardship, a 2 in data development, and a 1 in data support operations. The executives kind of look at me like going, yeah, okay, what am I supposed to do with that? And here's what you're supposed to do with it. Here are all the other airlines that I've compared them against. Now that's putting them on notice that they are behind the competition. And in fact, the airlines are generally behind the rest of the world. So you can see some very specific challenge areas that are there. So it seems kind of esoteric unless you can say, look, this might explain why airline X is not performing as well as airline Y, whatever that happens to be. So you can make this concrete. You can turn this into something that is meaningful for the executives. Hopefully that's useful for you. Again, Eileen, I'll try to remember to include this one in the deck too.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a note as well. Okay, let's see the next question. We have a new enterprise data architecture team. What is your suggestion on how to work with development teams to govern and manage enterprise data models, so stop developers to create tables any way they want and without slowing down projects?
Well, you're not going to like my advice. I'm going to tell you to take the data group out of the technology group and put them over in the business group. I'm going to tell you not to try and influence all of the projects that are going on because you can't. Again, I'm working with one organization right now that has several hundred projects going simultaneously. It's impossible for a small or even large-sized data architecture group to influence 1,200 or so projects. So you've got to pick your battles. You've got to step back and say, look, I'm not going to try to do everything, but we'll try to impact one project that might have some very significant effects in the overall process on this. And that's what you want to do, is to try and pick and choose your battles very, very well, show some specific results, and gosh, the most important thing is manage expectations. Because people think that just by forming a group and setting it up, you're done. Right? I hired somebody and I bought a tool. It must be taken care of. Nope. Now you're ready to start the journey. You're not ready to finish it. I hope that doesn't discourage you.
Let's see. I think this might be the last question for today. As a suggestion, would it be useful to separate the library science aspect of enterprise data architecture from the computer programming aspect?
Yes. Again, I'm not sure even a lot of the executives or the IT people will know what you mean by that, but that was what I said when I said take the group out of IT. Okay. It sounds crazy, but if you think about it, the business data is really a business function. IT thinks that as long as you can get to the database or turn on the system or you have access to it, their job is done, and it's somebody else's job to actually talk about what goes into it. So I like to see those groups reporting up through a business executive rather than reporting up through the CIO. Good luck. That's a very heretical move. It doesn't go over well, but if people think about it, it makes sense. By the way, I have an article that describes that in a little bit more detail. It's not quite done, but if you can send us an email, I will be glad to send you a copy of that and get your feedback on it to see whether it is helpful or not.
Great, and we did have one more question come through. What kinds of impact, what kinds of impact does semantic web technology may have to traditional data modeling?
It's an interesting leading question. One of the things we're thinking about doing with the seminars, we've got a couple of other spots for some interesting topics, and I'm looking right now into a topic called enriched enterprise data models. If you think about it right now, if I'm looking for something in the data model called customer, I will get exact keyword matches to everything that has customer out there. But that may not be, in fact, the best use of the way that works. So if you start to incorporate, and we're actually working on a project right now, and if you're doing something similar, I would love to compare notes with you. So is that Tammy I'm seeing there? Yeah. how that's going to work out. We're now looking at running the enterprise data model through a taxonometric organizer that will give us 3 circles, if you will, 3 concentric circles of information. Yes, here's the hits on customer. Here are the hits on things that are synonyms with customer, clients, right, things like that. And here are some things that other people were looking for when they were looking for customer, and other things like that. So yes, semantic technologies represents a really good step forward, although again, go back to my chart that I had at the beginning. If you have a poor quality information foundation, trying to build semantics on top of that is a waste of time and money. But if you have a solid information architecture, then building on top of that is something that you can try to do and that you should try to do. And I think that leaves us really, really exciting possibilities. But they'll have to wait for another 6 months or so before we finish our piece. But like I said, Tammy, if you have information on that, I'd love to get some more dialogue going there.
Great. And now we have the next question. Agree with taking the data group out of IT. The boss usually dictates the subject file. Oh, that wasn't a question. That was just a comment.
Thomas, you should tweet that one. That's a good one.
And let's see. How do you see the data architecture group interacting with the master data management group?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. So let's sort of step back a bit. First of all, why is there an MDM group? Now, it's not to say if there should or shouldn't be, but if there is, it's trying to address a data management problem, is it not? And usually it's something like, the list of, let's just say stores that we have is something that we ought to maintain that because a lot of our systems depend on where the locations of our stores are. So if we manage that information in an MDM pattern, with potentially MDM technologies, notice they are not the same, then that would seem to be a very good way to do that, right? Again, our list of customers might also be another MDM function or something like that. But gosh, the last thing you want is those 2 groups not talking to each other. Clearly, these are architectural functions and architectural-related types of discussions that ought to be occurring around those activities. So even if they are in separate groups, by gosh, let's make sure we set up a brown bag lunch once a week just so people will get together and talk about important problems in those areas. Because if we don't, the MDM is very likely to go off in one direction, and the enterprise architecture group is likely to go off in a completely different direction. The more integration between those 2 groups, the better.
Great. I don't see any more questions come through, so it looks like that was it for today. Thank you everyone so much for participating in today's event. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. And once again, you will receive all of today's materials within the next 2 business days. It'll be links to view the presentation, the slides, the recording, and then we will also put together a summary of this Q&A session, so you can review that if you like. Next month, we will focus on practical data modeling. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us for that as well. And then we have an April webinar on data operations management. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, Peter and Eileen, for the great presentation and Q&A. This was really great. Thanks, everyone, for the great questions.
All right, everyone,
have
a good one.
All conference hosts have hung up. This conference is over. Thank you.